Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Night had just fallen on Brookdale, a small town in the southern United States where social contrasts were felt on every street corner. Wealthy residential neighborhoods, with perfectly manicured lawns, stood alongside working-class areas marked by poverty and distrust of the police. In his patrol vehicle, the officer Mark Peterson he drove nonchalantly, chewing gum. A police officer for 15 years, he had earned a feared reputation, an authoritarian, brutal man, and above all, openly contemptuous of minorities. His colleagues knew him for his thinly veiled racist remarks, but no one dared contradict him. His arrest log was full, and he often boasted of being the one who keeps the streets in order. That evening, the routine seemed oppressive. Brookdale was almost asleep, and Mark, frustrated by an uneventful evening, was looking for a target. That's when he spotted a gleaming black car. A luxury sedan was driving calmly through an area where, in his opinion, that kind of car had no business being. Behind the wheel, he noticed an elegant black woman, her hands confidently placed on the steering wheel. Mark smiled coldly. There, finally something interesting. Without hesitation, he activated the flashing lights, forcing the driver to pull over to the side of the road. The woman calmly stopped her vehicle, turned off the engine, and waited. She showed no sign of panic, which almost immediately irritated Mark. He liked to see fear in the eyes of those he stopped. But here, he saw only a strange serenity, total control. He got out of his car, placed a hand on his belt and approached her, puffing out his chest as if to assert his authority. "Good evening, well, sort of. Do you know why I'm stopping you?" he said sharply. The woman turned her head towards him. Her gaze was deep, determined, almost intimidating. "No, officer. Perhaps you can explain it to me," she replied in a calm voice, without trembling. Mark clenched his jaw. This self-assurance bothered him. He preferred clumsy excuses, shifty glances, fearful gestures. But she stood her ground, without raising her voice, without lowering her eyes. "A car like that in this neighborhood? That's suspicious. So, papers, license, right away." The woman didn't protest. Slowly, she opened her bag and took out her wallet. She calmly handed over her papers, but Mark didn't even look at them. Deep down, he had already decided that she didn't belong, and that he was going to assert his authority over her. What Mark didn't know was that this arrest wasn't just a simple case of an abusive stop. The woman he had just arrested was no ordinary citizen. Her name was Angela Robinson, and she held one of the positions most feared by any corrupt police officer, director of the State Internal Affairs Office. And that night, it was his arrogance that would seal his fate. The flashing blue and red lights cast their bright blue and red beams onto the facades of the sleeping houses. The drone of the patrol car's engine echoed through the nearly deserted street. Inside the black sedan, Angela Robinson, she took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She was driving at the correct speed, respecting all the rules. But she also knew this type of police officer all too well, the kind who looked for an excuse to humiliate rather than protect. Agent Mark Peterson stepped forward with a confident stride, a flashlight in his hand, directing it straight into Angela's face. "Put your hands clearly where I can see them," he barked, in a dry voice. Angela gently raised her hands, placing her palms on the steering wheel. Her face remained impassive. "Officer, I have not committed any offense. May I know the reason for this check?" Peterson clicked his tongue against the roof of his mouth. He didn't like the measured, almost professional tone in which she spoke to him. "I'm the one asking the questions here. Take out your papers. Now." Angela complied without argument. She slowly opened her bag, took out her wallet, and handed over her documents. But instead of examining them, Mark snatched them roughly from her hands. He glanced at them quickly, without actually reading them. "Angela Robinson," he said, as if to memorize the name. Then he sneered. "We're going to check if this is really your car." Because a woman like you in a car like that doesn't fit. Angela met his gaze. Her tone, always calm, was a cold blade beneath a gentle appearance. Officer, your remarks are inappropriate. I ask you to. She didn't have time to finish. Mark banged his fist on the roof of his car. Silence. Here, I decide what is moved and what is not. Get out of the vehicle, slowly. Angela unbuckled her belt and opened the car door. Her heels clicked softly on the asphalt. She stood straight, dignified, despite the policeman's aggressive attitude. Hands on the hood, he ordered. Angela obeyed. Peterson approached her and began a cursory, abrupt, and needlessly humiliating search. A couple walking their dog stopped nearby, watching the scene. Then a young man took out his phone to film. Mark noticed. Move along. Nothing to see here, he shouted towards the witness. But the man did not move. Angela, for her part, remained silent, simply staring into the darkness of the street, as if she knew that the truth would soon come out. After a few minutes, Mark handcuffed him, without any justification. Obstruction. You'll be spending the night in jail. Maybe that'll teach you. Angela slowly turned her head towards him. Her gaze penetrated his, icy and resolute. Agent Peterson, you've just made an irreversible mistake. Mark sneered, convinced he had the upper hand. We'll see about that at the police station. Come on, let's go. Unbeknownst to him, he had just arrested the woman who had the power to destroy his career with a single report. The handcuffs snapped around the wrists of Angela Robinson cold and tight. The metal cut slightly into her skin, but she didn't flinch. Her face remained impassive, almost serene, which irritated the officer even more. Mark Peterson he wanted to see fear, supplications, panic. But she gave him nothing. The scene unfolded under the yellowish streetlights of a residential street, and several onlookers had already stopped. The flashes of flashing lights colored their faces. Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. What is he doing? She didn't do anything, I saw her, she was driving normally. He's exaggerating, that's clear, but with him, that's nothing new. A teenager, smartphone in hand, was discreetly filming. Mark noticed and stepped forward, furious. Turn that off right now, kid, or I'll give you a ticket for obstruction. But the young man did not move. It's my right to film in a public place, he replied in a trembling but determined voice. Angela gave a slight smile, imperceptible to Peterson, but enough to give him a strange feeling of being watched, judged. You are making your situation worse, madam. Resist any longer, and I'll charge you with assaulting a police officer. Mark launched into it, with icy arrogance. Angela calmly raised her eyes towards him. Agent Peterson, every gesture, every word you just uttered is being recorded. Believe me, you'll regret it very soon. This sentence, uttered with quiet confidence, caused a small crack in Mark's mask of self-assurance. But he immediately recovered, raising his voice to cover his discomfort. He shoved her roughly towards his patrol car, forcing her to sit in the back seat. Passers-by were now protesting more openly. It's shameful, shouted an old lady in pajamas, coming out of her house. Leave her alone, she hasn't done anything, added a middle-aged man. Mark slammed the door without replying, his jaw clenched. The more he felt public opinion shifting against him, the more ruthless he became. Before getting into his vehicle, he addressed the small crowd. Mind your own business. This woman broke the law, and I'm doing my job. But deep down, a growing unease was taking hold. This wasn't an ordinary arrest. He could feel it. Something about the way Angela looked at him disturbed him deeply. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. As if she had been waiting for this moment. Mark got behind the wheel, cast one last glance in the rearview mirror at his prisoner. Angela, handcuffed and sitting with dignity, uttered a phrase that echoed through the car. You've just triggered your own downfall, Agent Peterson. And you have no idea what's coming next. He chuckled to hide his discomfort. We'll see, tomorrow morning, you'll you'll be nothing more than a name on a report. What he didn't know was that his report the next day would not be what he had imagined. The patrol car drove through the streets of Brookdale under the flashing lights. At the rear, Angela Robinson. She remained impassive, her hands clasped despite the handcuffs. She calmly watched the city go by through the tinted window, as if she already knew how this story would end. Mark Peterson, on the other hand, was glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. His usual self-assurance wavered slightly. She hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, hadn't protested. She was content with a heavy silence, punctuated by phrases that still echoed in her head. "You have just triggered your own downfall." He shook his head to clear the echo and accelerated. A few minutes later, he parked the car in the back courtyard of the police station. The place, lit by powerful fluorescent lights, was bathed in a cold, white light. Two young recruits, Officer Clark and Officer Ramirez, were smoking a cigarette at the entrance when they saw Peterson get out of his car with a woman in handcuffs. Their eyebrows rose almost simultaneously. "What's this all about, Peterson?" Clark asked, stubbing out his cigarette. "Roadside check. Suspected stolen vehicle." "She resisted, I brought her in," Mark replied curtly. Ramirez glanced at Angela. She said nothing, but the way she held her head, the way she walked despite the handcuffs, exuded an unusual dignity. Not the posture of a criminal, but that of someone who belonged to another world. Angela met his gaze and said softly, "You will soon know who I am, officers. And you will understand." Mark gritted his teeth. "Silence. Move forward," he ordered, pushing her inwards. The usually bustling lobby of the police station seemed to slow down as they arrived. Several officers looked up from their reports, surprised to see Peterson bring in a woman in a smart suit, her wrists bound. Whispers immediately began to circulate. That's when the Sergeant David Harris, a man respected for his integrity and 20 years of service, appeared at the end of the corridor. He approached, his gaze fixed on Angela, then on Peterson. "Mark, do you know who this is?" he asked in a deep voice. Peterson chuckled, a little too loudly for his own comfort. "A suspect who believes her Armani Taylor gives her the right to drive a car that doesn't belong to her." Angela finally spoke. Her voice, clear and confident, cut through the silence like a blade. "I advise you to check my papers, Sergeant Harris. Right away." The sergeant frowned, picked up the documents that Peterson had never bothered to examine, and read carefully. His eyes widened. He raised his head, suddenly looking very serious, and stared straight into Mark's eyes. "You have made a serious mistake." Peterson's eyes widened, but before he had time to reply, Harris added, "Call Captain Miller immediately." "Right away." A shiver ran through the room. The police officers present exchanged glances heavy with unspoken meaning. Peterson's arrogance seemed to waver for the first time. Angela, for her part, stood straight, her face impassive, like a queen in the midst of a kingdom that did not yet know it belonged to her. Silence reigned in the police station lobby. The only sounds were the hum of the fluorescent lights on the ceiling and the whirring of the wall fan. The order of the Sergeant Harris had chilled the atmosphere. "Call Captain Miller immediately." Mark Peterson, confused and upset, he tried to regain his composure. "Sergeant, I think you're exaggerating. She's just a suspicious driver. No need to bother the captain about it." Harris, his eyes fixed on Angela's papers, slowly raised his head. His jaw was clenched, his gaze sharp. "You don't understand, Mark. You just stopped Angela Robinson." Around them, several police officers gasped in surprise. The name circulated in hushed tones like a shockwave. "Robinson? No, it can't be her. Do you think it's really?" Angela, still handcuffed, remained impassive. She calmly folded her arms in front of her and added, in a firm voice, "Director of the State Internal Affairs Office. And I can assure you that I will not forget any detail of what happened tonight." Mark paled, his lips parted slightly, but no words came out. His heart was pounding. It was impossible, he must be dreaming. This woman he had humiliated, handcuffed, searched like a criminal, was it her? Before he had time to react, the hall door burst open. Captain Robert Miller, the Brookdale police chief, entered briskly, followed by 2 lieutenants. His imposing stature and authoritative gaze were enough to reduce the room to total silence. As soon as he saw Angela, he froze completely. "Madam Robinson," he said with respectful gravity, bowing his head slightly. Then his eyes turned to Peterson, and his face immediately hardened. "Mark Peterson. What have you done?" Peterson stammered, his voice trembling. "Captain. I was just doing my job." "Routine check," she seemed suspicious, Anne. Miller interrupted him in a sharp, thunderous tone. "You just arrested and handcuffed the Director of Internal Affairs. The one who has authority over every police officer in this state, including you, including me." A heavy silence fell over the room. Mark felt his legs buckle. His colleagues looked away, some shook their heads in pity. Angela, still standing straight, took a step forward, the handcuffs still on her wrists. Her voice echoed in the hall, clear and implacable. "Agent Peterson, tonight you didn't just make an error in judgment. You revealed your true colors. And believe me, there will be consequences." Captain Miller signaled to a lieutenant to remove the handcuffs immediately. When the metallic click released her wrists, Angela gently rubbed her hands together, but her gaze remained fixed on Peterson. The captain turned to Harris. "Sergeant, place Officer Peterson on immediate temporary suspension. His weapon and badge, right away." Harris nodded and complied without a word. Mark, pale as a ghost, felt an abyss open beneath his feet. All his power, all his arrogance, reduced to dust in minutes. And for the first time in his career, he understood that tonight, he was no longer the hunter, but the prey. The heavy silence of the police station was broken by the sharp sound of an object falling onto the counter. It was the badge of the agent Mark Peterson which Sergeant Harris had just roughly snatched from him. Beside it, his service weapon was placed in a sealed box. Peterson, livid, had clenched his fists. Everything he considered his pride had just been taken from him in an instant. Angela Robinson, now free of her handcuffs, she straightened her elegant jacket, resuming a commanding posture. She calmly looked around, observing each police officer present in the room. Some lowered their eyes, while others seemed relieved to finally see someone dare to put a stop to Peterson's excesses. The Captain Miller's Ivanka. "Ms. Robinson, on behalf of the department, I offer you my sincerest apologies for what has just happened. I take full responsibility for—" Angela interrupted him gently, but firmly. "Captain Miller, I don't need your apologies. What I want is the truth. Tonight, one of your agents acted with complete impunity, abusing his authority and humiliating a citizen for no reason. And what I saw here cannot go unaddressed." She took a few steps into the room, her gaze fixed on Peterson, then turned to look at the rest of the staff. "From this moment on, I am officially opening an internal investigation not only into Officer Peterson, but also into the entire Brookdale department. Every file, every complaint, every report from your past years will be examined. And if I discover the slightest trace of abuse, corruption, or discrimination, I guarantee that sanctions will be imposed." A murmur rippled through the room. Some police officers exchanged worried glances. Peterson, for his part, made one last attempt to save face. "That's ridiculous. She's making a mountain out of a molehill to hide the fact that she was driving a car that isn't even registered in her name." Angela turned towards him. Her dark gaze crushed him to the spot. "The car is registered in my name, Agent Peterson. Everything is perfectly legal. The only illegal thing here is your methods. And believe me, I have enough evidence to prove it." Captain Miller, visibly uncomfortable, tried to calm the tension. "Ms. Robinson, may I suggest that you set up your team in our offices to facilitate this investigation?" Angela nodded. "My inspectors will be here tomorrow morning. Prepare all the files. Nothing will be hidden." She paused, slowly approached Peterson and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, You thought you were arresting a defenseless woman, officer. In reality, you arrested the person responsible for ending abuses like yours. And now, I'm the one arresting you, but with the law. The entire room held its breath. Peterson looked away, unable to meet the gaze of the woman he had tried to run over a few hours earlier. That evening in Brookdale, the investigation had just begun. And it promised to reveal much more than the abuses of a single man. The following morning, the police station Brookdale seemed transformed. The white neon lights of the hall illuminated a tense atmosphere, where every police officer avoided eye contact. Mark Peterson, now suspended and humiliated. Outside, the rumor of Angela Robinson's arrest and the impending investigation had spread. Residents, once silent in the face of abuses by certain officers, began to come forward. Among them were anxious but determined faces. The first to speak was Jamal Evans, a young man from the working-class neighborhood. He clenched his hands, holding his smartphone as proof. 6 months ago, Peterson arrested me for no reason. He beat me up in front of everyone and accused me of theft. I still have the photos of my injuries and the CCTV video. Angela nodded slowly, taking notes. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Every detail counts. Stay calm and precise, we will document everything. Next, an elderly woman, Mrs. Brown. He walked through the doors of the police station. His gait was slow, but his voice was strong and clear. This man, he threatened my son 2 years ago, just because he was running in the street. He wanted to scare him. I couldn't do anything at the time, but I won't stay silent now. Other residents followed. Shopkeepers, parents, students. Each shared their testimony, sometimes accompanied by photos, videos, or messages. Little by little, a damning picture emerged. Mark Peterson was not just a zealous officer, he was a predator within the police station. Angela listened to them all, taking meticulous notes. Her calm and inspiring posture impressed the witnesses, who finally felt heard. Mark, in an adjacent office, watched the scene through a one-way mirror. Each testimony was a blade of truth piercing him. He tried to protest, to defend himself. That's an exaggeration, that's false, he murmured to himself. But even his colleagues, those who once supported him, looked away, uneasy. The agent who thought himself untouchable now found himself isolated, confronted with a wave of truth he had never imagined. Angela looked up from her notes and stared intently at Peterson. Every word you hear here this morning will be used to establish your responsibility. No detail will be overlooked. And know this, I will stop at nothing to ensure that justice is served. The message was clear. That day, Brookdale began to change. Not through a written law, not through an official decree, but through the voices of those who had been silenced. And for Peterson, the beginning of the fall had just begun. A few days later, an austere room in the police station of Brookdale was transformed into an impromptu internal tribunal. The white walls were cold, the furniture minimalist. Chairs had been arranged to accommodate witnesses, staff, and members of the public from within the department. The atmosphere was charged with tension. In the center, behind a raised desk, Angela Robinson. She sat down, straight and imposing, embodying all the authority of her position. Beside her were 2 inspectors from her team and the Captain Miller, silent but vigilant. Facing them, Mark Peterson stood with his hands clasped in front of him, awkwardly trying to hide his nervousness. Angela opened the session with a clear and sharp voice. We are gathered here today to review the conduct of Officer Mark Peterson and his repeated actions that violate this department's code of conduct. Every testimony and every piece of evidence will be considered. Let us begin. The first to speak was Jamal Evans, the young man who had been beaten by Peterson a few days earlier. He recounted his story, providing precise details, the gratuitous violence, the insults, the fear he felt. Angela listened attentively, nodding at each detail. Then it was the turn of Mrs. Brown, the elderly woman whose son had been threatened. Her testimony was clear, irrefutable, and reinforced the image of an agent who had been abusing his authority for years. Peterson tried to defend himself. I was just doing my job. I was following protocol. But Angela interrupted her sharply. You are confusing protocol with your prejudice. You used your uniform to intimidate, humiliate, and terrorize. And this is not an isolated incident. Every word Angela spoke was precise, measured, but incisive. She cited reports, videos, and testimonies. The entire room, even Peterson's colleagues, sensed that the verdict was already underway. Peterson, red with anger and shame, tried to justify himself again. I never meant to hurt anyone. Angela approached him slowly, her gaze icy. Your intentions don't matter, Officer Peterson. Your actions have consequences. And every citizen you have humiliated deserves justice. The murmur of witnesses and colleagues filled the room. The internal hearing was clear. This was not a simple reprimand, but an exposé of Peterson's systematic abuses. At the end of the day, Angela announced. That session is over for today. The investigation continues, and all evidence will be reviewed. Agent Peterson, be prepared, justice will take its course, and there will be no favoritism. Mark left the room, humiliated and silent. For the first time, he understood that he was no longer in control. The head of internal affairs had just tipped the scales, and every past action of Peterson was now exposed to the harsh light of truth. A few weeks after the investigation began, the police station of Brookdale was steeped in an electric atmosphere. Every corner, every office, every report seemed to be under the scrutinizing gaze of Angela Robinson. His team meticulously examined hundreds of files, videos, and testimonies, retracing the history of abuse, prejudice, and violence perpetrated by Mark Peterson. Peterson, meanwhile, was living a waking nightmare. He had no weapons, no badge, no power. Every document his colleagues brought to his desk highlighted a new mistake, a new abuse. The victims' testimonies piled up, unjustified beatings, arbitrary arrests, racial slurs. Each piece of evidence seemed to seal his fate a little more. Angela entered the investigations room, carrying her files with meticulous precision. Her gaze fell upon Peterson, who was desperately trying to appear confident, but whose hands were trembling slightly. Agent Peterson, she began in a calm but sharp voice, you thought you could continue as before, believing that no one was watching you. But every word you spoke, every blow you struck, it's all recorded. Peterson stammered. I can explain, it was justified. Angela slowly shook her head. Justified? Your apologies will not suffice. Your victims do not want apologies, they want justice. And I am here to bring it to them. She placed a stack of files and videos on her desk. Peterson looked at them in horror. Dozens of witnesses had spoken, videos had been analyzed, and every act of brutality or intimidation was perfectly documented. You see, officer, you thought you were in control. But now I am. And believe me, your arrogance from last night won't save you. You're alone. A heavy silence fell. Peterson felt the weight of his years of abuse crash down on him like a mountain. The colleagues who had been watching him now looked away, some whispering amongst themselves that he deserved it. Angela stood up and, with a firm gesture, reached out a hand towards the files. I will make sure that every act, every abuse, every injustice you have committed is known to your superiors and the public. And you will be held accountable. The scales now tip in favor of justice, Officer Peterson. For the first time, Peterson realized there was no escape. The woman he had thought weak, whom he had humiliated and handcuffed, now held all the power. His arrogance and violence, which he believed to be unpunished, would catch up with him in the most relentless way possible. That evening, in his empty and silent office, Peterson realized that his career, his reputation and his honor were collapsing, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, could reverse the course of his fall. On the morning the verdict was to be delivered, the police station Brookdale seemed frozen in unbearable tension. Every police officer now knew the extent of the abuses committed by Mark Peterson, and every member of staff held their breath. Even Captain Miller, usually impassive, paced nervously back and forth, aware that this decision would mark a turning point for the department. Peterson sat in a makeshift internal courtroom, his fists clasped in his lap. His eyes avoided Angela Robinson's, but he could feel their intensity weighing on him. Anguish and shame were gradually replacing his usual arrogance. Angela entered, majestic, carrying an imposing file. She sat down behind the main desk and stared at Peterson with icy precision. There was complete silence. "Agent Peterson," she began, her voice echoing in the room, "after reviewing all the files, videos, and listening to every testimony, it is clear that your actions constitute a serious and repeated violation of the law and the ethics of our department." Peterson tried to reply, his voice trembling. I just wanted to uphold the law." Angela cut him off with a gesture. "Your intentions don't matter. Your abuse, humiliation, and racism are documented. You used your uniform to terrorize and intimidate, and this behavior cannot be tolerated." The murmur in the room intensified. Even his colleagues were now looking away, some nodding their heads in approval. "Therefore," continues Angela in an implacable tone, "I impose the following sanctions against you: immediate and permanent dismissal from the Brookdale Police Department, withdrawal of any retirement pension, and a ban on serving in any other police department in the state." An icy silence followed the announcement. Peterson felt the ground give way beneath his feet. Each word resonated like a hammer blow to his fate. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. His hands trembled, his legs weakened, and his mind refused to believe what had just happened. Angela stood up, walked slowly forward, and looked him straight in the eyes. "You thought you were above the law. Tonight, you discover that no one is above justice." Peterson left the room, head bowed, face red with shame and humiliation. The police officers present watched in silence, some murmuring words of relief. For the first time, Mark Peterson realized the full extent of his past actions, the fear he had instilled, the lives he had shattered, and the career he had just lost forever. Angela, for her part, remained in the room, her gaze determined, aware that this victory was not only hers, but that of all the victims of Officer Peterson. That day, Brookdale witnessed justice finally prevail over arrogance and impunity. The weeks following the fall of Mark Peterson marked a turning point for the police department. Of Brookdale. Peterson's actions had left scars, but they had also opened the eyes of many colleagues to the abuses and injustices that could occur behind the closed doors of a police station. Angela Robinson, now fully respected by all staff, she organized several training and awareness sessions. Her goal was not just to punish, but to transform the system from within. She emphasized the importance of respect, transparency, and fairness in every police decision. Citizens who had witnessed Peterson's abuses were invited to participate in dialogue workshops, helping to rebuild trust between the community and the police. Stories of fear and humiliation were heard, acknowledged, and documented. Peterson, for his part, disappeared almost entirely from public life. His ruined career served as a cautionary tale: even the most arrogant and powerful cannot escape the consequences of their actions. His former colleagues took it as a permanent warning: authority without accountability is doomed to collapse. One evening, Angela stood on the doorstep of the police station, looking out at the city, Brookdale light up under the streetlights. She thought of the victims, of those who had found the courage to speak out, and of the importance of her role. She smiled slightly, not arrogantly, but with the deep satisfaction of having restored a balance. "Justice is not just a law on paper," she murmured to herself. "She lives on in courage, in truth, and in those who dare to stand up." This case remained etched in the city's memory. It showed that arrogance and racism, even when protected by a uniform or a badge, always eventually meet the light of truth. And that sometimes, a single determined individual can tip the scales, revealing that justice, however slow, always prevails in the end. Thus, Brookdale began a new chapter, marked by vigilance, transparency, and the certainty that every citizen, regardless of color or status, deserved respect and justice.